Okay, we had some questions. Let's see. The first question came, it was a student who was reading and came across a sentence he did not understand. And Alessandro and I spoke of this just now, and we have figured out this sentence. I will read it to you. It's kind of long, so I might have to read it more than once, and then I will explain what we have decided it means. Here's the quote. If we are to dwell on the freedom of Greek thought from dogmatic prejudice, we cannot be too grateful for the absence of this particular belief in a divine creator. No hypothesis is more facile and supine. Nothing is so likely to stupefy and lull to slumber that wonder which is the parent of philosophy, than an explanation which will account with equal readiness for every feature of the world, whether good or bad, ascribing what is good to the transparent benevolence, and what is bad to the inscrutable wisdom of omnipotence. Alessandro, have you made this quote available to them to read somehow?
I'm trying to. Just give me a second.
Okay, Alessandro is trying to get the text of this quote up on the website so that you can read it. It's
I'm going to put it on the chat.
Oh, he's putting it on the chat board. It's a very complex set of sentences. So I would like you to be able to see it as we discuss it. First of all, it seems to me that this quote is in support of atheism. Sometimes it is helpful to know where the author is coming from, what the author's bias is, in order to understand what the author is trying to say. So I'm quite sure this is an anti-Christian, anti-religious segment that we've just read. Okay, let's consider the first phrase. If we are to dwell on the freedom of Greek thought from dogmatic prejudice. If something is free from something else, free from dogmatic prejudice, that means it does not have any of that. For example, my water is free from impurity. It is pure water. It's good. It is free from any poisons. It is free from dirt or bugs. It is clean. It's free from bad things. So, they're saying that Greek thought is free from dogmatic prejudice. So, prejudice is a pejorative term. Prejudice is always bad. It's not good. Dogmatic prejudice is dogmatic means I am sticking to a rule. Don't bother me with new ideas. I know what I believe. I'm going to stick with this. Don't trouble me with the facts. My mind is made up. I am not open. So people who are dogmatic follow a system of thought without any open-mindedness. So dogmatic prejudice, the fact that it is prejudice is the system of thought that they are sticking to rigidly, is not valid. It is a wrong-headed prejudice. So they're saying Greek thought is free from dogmatic prejudice. So they're saying the Greeks are open-minded and have pure thought. Pure as this water. Pure logic, pure reason. No narrow-minded dogmatic prejudices for them. So, if we are to dwell on the freedom of Greek thought from dogmatic prejudice, to dwell on means to ponder, to think about it for a long time, to ruminate and chew it over, to gaze upon it with satisfaction. So, if we dwell on the freedom of Greek thought from dogmatic prejudice, we cannot be too grateful for the absence of this particular belief in a divine creator. When it says we cannot be too grateful, it means we should be very grateful. It is impossible to overestimate how wonderful it is that we have this gift. It's not possible to be too grateful. It is not possible to say enough about how lucky we are. That's what can't be too grateful means. We cannot be too grateful means we should be extremely grateful, thankful. Grateful means thankful for the absence of the belief in a divine creator. So, that sentence means when we dwell upon the beauty and purity of Greek thought and its freedom from dogmatic prejudice, we cannot be too grateful for the absence of the belief in the divine creator. So the belief in a divine creator would be a terrible impurity in there that would just defile it all. Thank God we don't have to believe in a divine creator. That's the first sentence. Second sentence. No hypothesis is more facile and supine. Nothing is so likely to stupefy and lull to slumber that wonder which is the parent of philosophy. That's just the first two phrases. Okay, first phrase. No hypothesis is more facile or supine. What it's saying is the hypothesis or the idea, maybe this is true. A hypothesis is an idea that is not confirmed. It's just a thought, maybe this is the way things work. So, no hypothesis is as facile. That means easy and shallow. Okay, no hypothesis is more easy. Nothing is so likely to stupefy and lull to slumber. Stupefy and lull to slumber are very similar actions. If you stupefy, it's like turning on the TV set and people go, because they are watching TV. They are stupefied. Or lull to slumber. So you go to your baby and you sing a lullaby and you get her to close her eyes, trying to get this baby to sleep. Lull to slumber. So they're saying this hypothesis is nothing could be easier, and nothing could be so likely to stupefy people intellectually or lull to slumber. That wonder, which is the parent of philosophy. Wonder is curiosity, intellectual stimulation, the ability to ponder creation and say, how does it work? That wonder is the parent of philosophy. So they're saying that philosophers, those who love wisdom, begin with wonder. But something is going to lull the wonder to sleep. Something is going to stupefy it. The hypothesis that follows is going to do these things. So, what is the hypothesis? It is this: than an explanation which will account with equal readiness for every feature of the world, whether good or bad, ascribing what is good to the transparent benevolence and what is bad to the inscrutable wisdom of omnipotence. Okay, so the whole idea being that religious people or Christians, this is actually not true, but this is the allegation. This is what the guy is saying is true. That Christians look at the world in a very facile and easy way. No matter what happens to them, they say, this is good. It doesn't matter if they are poor or rich, it's all good. It doesn't matter if they are sick or healthy, it's all good. It doesn't matter if their child is killed or their child grows and, becomes a prosperous adult, it's all good. It doesn't matter if communism takes over or big business takes over, it's all good. It doesn't matter if you get a disease or escape a disease, it's all good. No matter what happens, it's all good. They ascribe the good things to the goodness of God. That means they credit God for being good. This good thing is proof that God is good. But they also ascribe the bad things to the wisdom of God. And they say, God is good. I don't understand how this must be good, but it must be good. Okay, that's the idea. The idea is that no hypothesis is more facile, nothing is so likely to stupefy than to explain the world as it's all good, no matter if it's good or bad. Ascribing the good to a good God and the bad to a good God who has a different wise perspective than mine. As I was discussing this with Alessandro, I said to him, the force of this argument is strong because Christians really do believe that all things work together for those who love God and are called to His purpose. And we are called to have faith and to trust in good times and bad. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, says the Apostle Paul. But Alessandro disagreed. He said, no, it is not stupefying to wonder. It is not lulling your mind to sleep. It is not the opiate of the masses. As has been said of Christianity. But rather, Christians, as is also true of atheists, begin with assumptions. One assumption is that God is good. And this is not an unfounded assumption, because he is the creator of creation. So you can find evidence for that assumption. Second assumption is that God is faithful and that he is personal. He's involved in what happens to us. Now, within the framework of these assumptions, we are trained by the scripture to accept both good and evil from the hand of the Lord, and to respond, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." However, that does not stop us from deep rumination, deep meditation, deep questioning, deep doubting, deep pondering and wondering. And these wonderings are the parent of philosophy, as much as the Greek thought was the parent of philosophy. So Christians have deep mysteries, and they wonder about them, and they seek for knowledge within a framework of faith. And my final comment to Alessandro before I came on the camera was, it seems to me, in retrospect, as I look at history and as I look back at what God has done, I can almost always see that he was good, and that he was faithful, and that what he brought into my life brought a good result. He used it. But when I'm in the circumstance, many times it's hard to see that something is good if it feels bad. And my friend also said a long time ago, he said, the problem is we have a different definition of good and bad than God. To us, good means comfortable, that which makes me comfortable, and bad is that which gives me pain or hurts me or my loved ones. But to God, that's not the criteria. Those are not the criteria for good and evil. Those are not the standards. God's goal is to make us good. And sometimes he has to employ tools in the process that can give us some pain, so yet it is good. It's like the drill of a dentist who has to cause pain in order to bring healing. So sometimes we don't know what is good and what is bad, but we do have faith. So that was a very long discussion of a very short quote. The student particularly asked about the phrases to dwell on. So I'll highlight the phrases that were problematic. If we are to dwell on, the freedom of the Greeks. And dwell literally means to live somewhere. I dwell in a dwelling. A dwelling is a house, and I dwell in it. That means I live there. That's literal. But figuratively, it means to think about it for a long time. Like to dwell in the scriptures is to spend a lot of time meditating on the verses of the Bible. So to dwell on means to think about something deeply and for a long time. And then it said, he asked about, nothing is so likely to stupefy and lull to slumber that wonder. I think I dealt with that already in the text. And then he had a problem with the word than, which the real problem was Levis does this and this author does this. What he did was he took the core of a sentence and he broke it up and put more stuff in between. And then you're picking up the core of the sentence with the word than. So the core of the sentence is no hypothesis is more facile than an explanation which will account with equal readiness. And then also, nothing is so likely to stupefy than an explanation of the world which relies with equal readiness on it, etc. Okay, so the word than is picking up after each of the two phrases that form the subject. Okay. There was a second comment that was sent by a student, and he said that he is trying to copy certain excerpts from the book into an audio reading, and asked if I would, maybe read certain portions all by themselves so that he could snip them and put them into an audio reading. And we have discussed it, and Alessandro and I will get together and prepare a complete audio file. But until we get that on, I will try to do a complete fluid reading for the sake of anyone who wants it. The problem is I never know how far we are going to get, so it will take some editing to get it all together. But we will put a complete audio file of this chapter on the website as soon as we can. Okay, now I'm going to begin with the book now, but last week somebody asked me a question which I could not answer, and I said I would answer it this week, and it's about politics. So I'm going to put this at the end so that anyone who is not interested in politics doesn't have to listen. But I researched the issue of immigration in Arizona this week, and I have thoughts to share with you. But because it's so late now, usually we don't like more than a half an hour for questions at the beginning. So I'll put this to the end. So stay tuned if you're interested in American politics. And one last announcement I want to make before I start with the book. Last week I told you that we were going to put a poll on the website asking you if you are interested in coming to America to study English and to stay in my house and have lessons with me, and also visit with Olavo and be a part of his class, online class, and also witness his radio show and spend time with him. We never got the poll up onto the website yet, but we're going to try to do that soon. And if you think it is something you would be able to afford to do and would like to take some time, maybe 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, to come and work on English, I'm interested in knowing if you would like to do that. We will be putting the details on the website as soon as we can, and then we'll look for your feedback. So that will be coming on the website soon. Now let me just grab the book and we'll get started. Okay, let's see where we are. I'm going to try to move my chair a little. Okay, I believe we are on page 35. And we finished at a very good stopping place, right in the middle of the page. The last 2 words of the paragraph that we finished are judgment and analysis. I will back up and read a couple of paragraphs before so that you will remember what we were talking about, and then we will launch into the new section. In the new section, Levis is going to try to explain positively what he means by English as a discipline of thought and by the discipline of analyzing literature in a way that will contribute to the literary knowledge and the experiential knowledge of mankind and the ongoing continuous body of wisdom of the world. And he has a very specific idea of this, although up until now in the book, he hasn't really told us what he is talking about. So that's where we're going today. But I'll back up and read 2 paragraphs and then move on. Page 35, beginning in the first full paragraph. Yet I think that Andreski, offered those sentences to consider, might very well pass the total community as inoffensive to his habit of disciplined common sense, his criteria of logic and clarity. Pass it as being for thought no more than the logically and clearly analyzable collectivity. In the part played by this concept in his thought, we may see the extent to which the Cartesian ghost can disable a notably vigorous intelligence. To the business of exorcism, the distinctive discipline of thought that should characterize English may be said to be addressed. But that is only a negative account. Its force depends on a realization of what positively the kind of thinking which the discipline fosters is. To the implicitly invited challenge, there can, of course, be no answer that is direct and brief. I will move towards providing one by recapitulating the account I have given in various places of the nature of practical criticism, or rather, of what I refuse to call that, but exemplify later in this book under judgment and analysis. Okay, I want to remind you very briefly that in the beginning of the passage I just read, we were talking about a phrase, the total community. And Levis has the idea that the total community is sort of a mystic body, whereas Andreski thinks of it as a collection of people. And Andreski is not aware of the fact that it is possible that there's another definition. Andreski's blinders are on, and he can only see the word in its shallow meaning, missing all the richness and depth that that Levis is trying to evoke by using a word in a special context. And Levis blames this inability to see depth. It's kind of an intellectual lack of depth perception. He blames it on the Cartesian ghost. In other words, it's a binary on-off understanding of the world that only takes into account that which is material and leaves out everything which is not measurable by instrumentation. And this ghost, this idea that nothing exists other than the material, can be exorcised by a discipline of study which uncovers the layers of meaning, a discipline of study which exemplifies the layers of meaning which Andreski can't see, a discipline or practice of study which disambiguates and makes explicit, brings out into the open and directly examines these aspects of meaning which are hidden in the mist to the Cartesian dualist. Okay, so once you have brought it into the forefront, shined light on it, and discussed it, a person like Andreski could no longer deny its existence. Okay, so now Levis is going to tell us explicitly about the discipline of study of literature which he requires from his students and which we ought to practice. So, now we're moving into the new stuff, and I will do a complete reading of the first paragraph for someone who's trying to make an audio cutting. Okay, so this is the first paragraph on page 35 that's new to us, beginning with the words, analysis is a process. Analysis is a process of recreation in response to the black marks on the pages. It is a more pondered following through of the process of recreation in response to the poet's words that any genuine and discussable reading of the poem must be. Such a recreation entails a diversity of kinds of judgment. And when I emphasize the diversity, I am thinking of the different kinds of value that we cover with the one word. A judgment is personal and spontaneous, or it is nothing. But to say that it is spontaneous is not to say that it may not have been prompted by a suggestion from another. And to say that it is personal is not to say that it means to be merely that. The form of a judgment is, this is so, isn't it? The question asking for confirmation that the thing is so, but prepared for an answer in the form of, yes, but. The but standing for corrections, refinements, precisions, amplifications. The judgments may, by Andreski's criteria, be value judgments, but they are in intention universal. Let's begin at the top of the paragraph. Analysis is a process of recreation in response to the black marks on the pages. Somewhere in school, I was taught that synthesis is the reverse or the inverse process to analysis. Synthesis is a process of, analysis is a process of breaking down into parts and examining each part separately. So analysis takes a whole and breaks it into pieces. So we can look at each piece separately, understand them thoroughly, and then put them back together and understand the whole. This is the process we often use in studying Levis's sentences. Synthesis is the reverse process. It is the process of taking the pieces, usually unconnected pieces of information that we get from various places, and putting them all together to make a new idea, a whole. So it's this. So, when Levis began his dissertation with the sentence, analysis is a process of recreation in response to the black marks on the pages. It stumped me for a second. It stumped me. That means I was thinking, and I went, whoop. I didn't understand him. I even had to ask Alessandro, isn't analysis breaking apart, not recreating? And he said, yes, it is. So I had to think about that. But even in my discussion, I told you the purpose of analysis is not to rip it apart and leave it apart. The purpose is to rip it apart so that you can put it back together and understand it. So, analysis is not just this. It is this. Where you understand it and in a new way, and it now has clarity. It now has form and structure that up here it didn't have. We couldn't really understand what it was until we ripped it apart and then in the end put it all back together. And now, presto, we understand it. And that happens all the time in this class, where we take an incomprehensible paragraph-long sentence and we take it apart bit by bit. We understand each bit individually, and then we put it all back together, and all of a sudden the light bulbs go on, and the whole thing makes sense in a new way. So, analysis is a process of recreation in response to the black marks on the pages. Now, there's another dimension. Let's think of it this way. Supposing the poet had an idea. So here we have the poet, and he has an idea. And he breaks it up into words, letters, phrases, images, thoughts, feelings, ideas. And he puts all those out there on a page, and then we take the book with a white page and black markings, and all of a sudden, ideas, images, emotions, thoughts, and feelings are prompted and evoked in our mind, and they all come together in a new piece of wisdom that maybe we didn't have before. It's a process by which an abstract concept is translated from the poet's mind into the reader's mind. So it's a process of communication. I'll just take an aside right now and tell you that this morning I was driving with my 16-year-old son, Carlos, to our calculus class. Carlos and I are studying math together at the local college. We are in class together. I am studying because I want to teach at the college, and he is studying because he is 16 and wants to move on. We happen to be together in the same class, and the class is calculus. So, we were discussing the fact that mathematicians have proved that the numbers 1 and 2 are more frequent in nature than 3 through 9. And we were saying, how can you prove something like that? And so I was talking about orders of magnitude and exponential growth of numbers. And Carlos was saying, no, 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 that can't be it. And Carlos was like, my son Carlos is a mathematically very, very smart. He's really almost a mathematical genius, I think, as a mother. But anyway, he said, no, I can see it. I can see it in my mind how to prove it, but I can't say it. And I said, well, that is because you are not a trained mathematician. You need words and symbols and concepts that you can use to put structure to your thought. This flash of intuition, you have to put structure to it and then put it out there for discussion in terms that are agreed upon by other mathematicians. And he said, okay, I'll try. So he tried to explain this intuition he had of how to prove the mathematical concept. And it was tortured. It was very difficult for him to express what he was trying to say. He had to use many words to speak of a simple concept that if he had had a vocabulary word for, he could have said it quickly. And all the while he was pushing aside clouds of mist in his thinking, trying to embody his ideas in words that weren't good, words that weren't specific, words that weren't designed to express this concept. And in the end, he said, do you understand? And I said, not really. No. I said, but I know a couple of things. Number one, you should be trained as a mathematician, because then you will not be frustrated. And two, you have just experienced something that people who have no good facility with language experience all the time. A person who does not have a mastery of a rich and subtle language, they could get flashes of insight and brilliance because they're human, but they can't put it into words because they don't have the tools. And that's part of what we are all about here, trying to encourage students to go to literature, to go to grammar, to go to ever more explicit and subtle vocabulary, so that they can embody ever more lofty thoughts in the abstract realm. So, where were we? First sentence. Okay. So, analysis, and he's using the term analysis as the discipline of studying literature that the whole book is about. English as a discipline of thought. Okay, now we're into his judgment and analysis, which is the same as practical criticism. This is the procedure. He's calling it analysis in this paragraph. Analysis is a process of recreation of an idea in my head, recreating an idea that was in the poet's head, went to the marks on the page. Now it's being recreated in my head. So the marks on the page are a blueprint that's supposed to give me images that were already created in the poet's mind. So it's a process. Analysis is a process of recreation in response to the black marks on the pages. It is a more pondered following through of the process of recreation in response to the poet's words that any genuine and discussable reading of the poem must be. Okay, let's look at that sentence. First of all, vocabulary, pondered. That's really the same as concept as we talked about to dwell on. To dwell on is to ponder. So it means think deeply and for a long time. Okay, so just remember that word, because now we're going to look at the end of the sentence and then bring pondered back in. Okay. It is a more pondered following through of the process of recreation in response to the poet's words that any genuine and discussable reading of the poem must be. Okay, let's start out with the end of the sentence. Anytime you read a poem, you go through the process we just spoke of, where you have the poet's mind. He puts his thoughts into markings on a page, symbolically represents his ideas and thoughts. It forms a blueprint. Then the reader takes in this and reconstructs the same ideas, feelings, emotions, and concept. Okay. Now, anytime a person reads a poem, that's happening. But he's saying reading and discussing. Okay, so any genuine and discussable reading of the poem. So, when the poem is read in a genuine way, really read, trying to hear and feel what the poet is saying, and also to discuss it with others. So it's a shared process. So now we have readers in the plural discussing. Okay. Anytime you have this happening, you are going to have a recreation of the poet's concept. Okay. Analysis is more than that. Okay? So, when you have a reading and a discussion, you have a certain level of appreciation of what the poet is saying. You see it. You enjoy it. It touches you, perhaps a bit lightly, as it goes by. Maybe you're sitting through a reading of several poems by one author. This poet is doing a reading of his works. So you listen to it, you applaud. Maybe you cry at one point. Maybe you laugh at one point. Maybe you fall asleep during one of them because that poem didn't speak to you. Okay, so anytime you have a reading in a discussable format, you have some level of recreation. But the process of analysis goes beyond just the simple reading for pleasure and enjoyment that I might have in my living room if I have a poet there. Oh, read us some of your poems. Okay, we're not going to analyze them. We're just going to enjoy them. All right. So, analysis is a process of recreation in response to black marks on the pages. Analysis is a more pondered following through of the process of recreation in response to the poet's words that any genuine and discussable reading of the poem must be. Okay, so it's a more pondered following through of the process. Okay, supposing we're reading this and I say, "Stop! Could you read that again?" And then, after he reads it again, I say, "Could I have a copy of it in print?" So he gives me a copy in print. In fact, he has several copies in print, and he hands it around to all of us. Maybe this is now an English class. And there's a whiteboard. And he says, "What do you think?" So then I get up to the whiteboard and I say, or maybe it's posted on the board, and I say, this is what I think it means. And I start quoting, this line says this line says that. Okay, that's the level he's talking about, where you not only hear it and enjoy it and read it and even talk about it a little. He's saying we're going to go and we're going to take this thing line by line, stanza by stanza, and we're going to analyze it. And in that sense, we're going to recreate it much more rigorously and exhaustively than you could ever do if it's just in a simple, brief, transient reading. Okay? So that's what he means by analysis. All right? Analysis is a more pondered following through. By the way, follow through is when you complete a task. If you start something but you don't finish it, then you lack follow through. A person who follows through with things is a person who is thorough. They dot the last I and cross the last T. They tidy up after themselves after they are done. They clean their tools. Follow through is to complete the process. So the suggestion is that, yes, when you read the words, you get somewhat of an image, but not a complete image, unless you follow through pondering. So follow through really probably can't be done in one setting, this analysis. With the pondering really implies time, and follow through implies thoroughness. That you're going to complete the task. Okay, so that's what following through means. So it is a more pondered following through of the process of recreation in response to the poet's words that any genuine and discussable reading of the poem must be. Such a recreation entails a diversity of kinds of judgment. And when I emphasize the diversity, I am thinking of the different kinds of value that we cover with the one word. Okay, I think the one word is judgment. Okay, and with judgment we cover a lot of different kinds of value. So when you're talking about a poem, remember we talked about a poem a few classes back, and we talked about the surface images, we talked about what I thought it meant, talked about what it evoked in my mind, talked about how my emotions began to change because certain choice of words evoked something a little different. Then we talked about how it plunged me into a grief, a poem that I expected to be light and hilarious and funny and comic, in the end became deeply moving and poignant to me. Okay, so there were many kinds of judgment. You could say, is it talking about cats? Is it talking about keys? Is it talking about death? Is it talking about betrayal and divorce and infidelity? Many levels. So you could say, I like the rhyme. I like the rhythm. I like the vocabulary. I like the images, the imagery. I like the spirit. You know, you have many types of value that you can look at with a poem, and they all fall under the word judgment. Many types of value. So, such a recreation entails a diversity of kinds of judgment. So diversity meaning many kinds and many different kinds. And when I emphasize the diversity, I am thinking of the different kinds of value that we cover with the one word when we're looking at a poem. A judgment is personal and spontaneous, or it is nothing. This construction, it is this or it is nothing, is a way of emphasizing it is this for sure. The or it is nothing means we know it's not nothing, therefore it's this. It's spontaneous or nothing. Well, if it's not spontaneous, it's nothing. I don't know how to express it, but it has a force of to make more sure, to emphasize that it is this, because we know it's not nothing. So, it's spontaneous and personal, or nothing. If it's not spontaneous, and if it's not personal, then it's not really real at the moment. Okay? A judgment is personal and spontaneous, or it is nothing. But to say that it is spontaneous is not to say that it may not have been prompted by a suggestion from another. Okay, here we get into all our negatives, and you remember in English, a double negative means a positive. We do not have double negatives for emphasis. A double negative means a positive. So let's look at this thing. I'm going to paraphrase it, make it a little simpler. To say it is spontaneous is not to say that, what do they say? Okay, all right. I'm trying to think of a way to simplify this so it'll be clear. To say that it is spontaneous is not to say that nobody prompted it. Okay, spontaneous means it came out of me. It's just my response. But to say that it is spontaneous does not mean it is not caused. For example, if you poke me, I'm going to go, oh. If you hammer my thumb, I'm going to shout. The response is spontaneous. It is not premeditated. It is not something I calculated. It is not something I decided to do to give an effect. It just happened. It came out of me. So it is spontaneous. That's not to say that it didn't have a cause. That's not to say that it didn't have a cause. So, to say this is not to say that this other thing isn't true. So somehow, is not to say is a construction that we use to compare an idea which might give you a conclusion which is not true. So, to say this, which might lead you to believe something, is not to say that something. Okay, so I might say, if it is spontaneous, it is only arbitrary to you, but someone else wouldn't think it's not objective. It's purely subjective. If it's spontaneous, what difference does it make? It's just your opinion, and nobody else is going to think that. No. To say that it is spontaneous is not to say that it's purely subjective, or that it is confined only to me, or that it is not prompted by someone else. So if someone says to me, boo, and I say, that reminds me of a story, a ghost story. The fact that a whole ghost story came to mind is spontaneous, but it was prompted by the word boo that someone said. In English, boo means ghosts. That's what they say. Okay, to say that it is spontaneous is not to say that it may not have been prompted by a suggestion from another. So, we are discussing a poem. Somebody says, this poem means this to me. And then I say, wow, that makes me think of something else. And I say, this is what it means to me. So my thought is spontaneous, but it's prompted by a suggestion of another. And to say that it is personal is not to say that it means to be merely that. Okay, I want to point out a couple of things. First, if you can see the text, can they see the text that we're studying? Do they have a file? Okay, you may be looking at this text. I hope you are. Notice, after the word another, it is not to say that it may not have been prompted by a suggestion from another. We have a semicolon. And then we go on to say another complete sentence in exactly the same form. Now, the reason that the author did not simply end with a period and go on to say the thing about it being personal is because the two thoughts are so closely related that they really mean the same thing. There are two ways of saying the same thing, and they really together form one concept, one idea. So when we have two ideas that are each complete in themselves, but are so closely related that you almost want to make one sentence, you put a semicolon, and then you just join the two sentences. Okay? So that's a way of joining two sentences that are closely related. And I want to point out that the sentence which precedes this one is also very closely related. When it says, a judgment is personal and spontaneous, or it is nothing. It starts out with this concept of it's personal and it's spontaneous. So, a judgment is personal and spontaneous, or it's nothing. That's a very strong statement. It's definitely personal, definitely spontaneous, or it's nothing. But then he goes on to say it's spontaneous does not mean it was not prompted by another. And to say that it is personal is not to say that it is merely personal. So what's merely personal? We could just erase this and keep this in here. To say that it is personal is not to say that it is merely personal. Levis is emphasizing the objective nature of the realities we are speaking of. All along there have been these philosophers who say that only what is material has independent existence, and all of these immaterial things are purely subjective and personal. They have no independent existence. They are illusions. They're illusory. They don't really exist. They're just the output of our brains, just like sweat is the output of our body. You know, our brain just has this ability to put out all these ideas which have no relevance to reality, no reference in external reality. But Levis is trying to build a case that these things, though immaterial, yet have independent reality that can be shared between individual people who perceive them in the same way. They don't perceive them in the same way because their minds resemble one another. They perceive them in the same way because these things have independent existence that can be perceived. Okay, so when he says it is not merely personal, that means it's not only personal, it also has independent existence. It is not merely spontaneous, it's actually prompted collaboratively by more than one person interacting together like all communication. Like Carlos trying to talk about his mathematical concept, and if he could have used words that were commonly agreed upon by mathematicians and concepts that were verified by established mathematical proofs, well, then he could have discussed it with mathematicians and found out if it was true or false by the collaborative effort. And we can talk about poetry that way, or human wisdom, or morality, ethics, all sorts of value-colored things. So, a judgment is personal and spontaneous, or it is nothing. But to say that it is spontaneous is not to say that it may not have been prompted by a suggestion from another, and to say that it is personal is not to say that it means to be merely that. The form of a judgment is, "This is so, isn't it?" The question asking for confirmation that the thing is so, but prepared for an answer in the form of "yes, but," the but standing for corrections, refinements, precisions, amplifications. I had another experience I want to share with you of this kind of communication. As I shared with you in the past lesson, a couple lessons ago, I am in a time of grief because my marriage has separated and my husband has gone away, and some friends came to take me out to dinner, talk with me, comfort me, etc., give me some ideas. And one of the friends was talking to me about his experience of God. And he was saying, when you are in a time like this, when everything is crazy, you have to have blind obedience to God. You have to just do what he says. Don't think about the results. Don't try to understand. Just ask him, what should I do? Do it. And then as you are doing it, keep looking up to God and saying, is this right? And keep doing it. Just blind obedience every day. Wake up, ask God, what should I do? And do it. Now, I thought to myself, as he was sharing that, I thought, this is exactly my experience of God. I feel that God is telling me what to do, and I am just doing it. I'm not looking for where is the money going to come from, or at least not too much anyway, and I am not thinking, why am I going to do this rather than that? I am just doing what I feel God is calling me to do without much knowledge. And I thought, how many people would be willing to say something like, ask God and do it, if they had not experienced it themselves? And he has experienced it, and I have experienced it, and so when he puts it into words, I can recreate it in my own mind and say, yes. Or I could say, yes, but. Yes, but. Actually, I didn't have any buts, because I really said just yes. That was what I was experiencing. But I think this is the kind of judgment that Levis is talking about, a judgment that says, look, I see something this way. What do you see? I experience something this way. What do you think? This is what it means to me. What do you think? So it is personal and it is subjective, but it's still subject to a true or false, right or wrong. Is this real? Is it not real? Is it just me? And we look to each other for these kinds of confirmations. We say, is it real? And then someone else says, yes, it's real. Or they might say, I don't know, I think you're going off the deep end here a little bit. Or I think you're going a little too far. Let's bring some balance. So then we are communicating about something that has existence, but not material existence. Okay, so judgments. It is in the form of, this is so, isn't it? The question asking for confirmation that the thing is so, but prepared for an answer in the form of, yes, but. The but standing for corrections, refinements. Yeah, that's true, but for me it's a little bit like this as well. Precisions, it's exactly this. Amplifications, yes, and this, and that, and the other. So that's what all those things mean. The judgments may, by Andreski's criteria, be value judgments, but they are intention universal. When you say value judgments, according to Andreski, he's talking about something that is purely subjective or merely personal. Like, for me, that color really doesn't do it, but for you, it might be just right. You know, these are subjective responses that really, in the larger scope of things, aren't very important because they're confined to one person. That would be what he means by Andreski's value judgment. But they are in intention universal, means that when my friend and I were talking about blind obedience, we weren't really talking about something that was only personal. We were talking about something we expect to be universal. He was advising me as though he were talking about the law code of Virginia, which is written in pen and ink. This is what you have to do in this circumstance. So he was intending it to be universal, and I received it as such because it spoke to me. So it's personal and subjective, but it's also universal. Let me see how long this next paragraph is. Would you like to go on a bit into the next paragraph? It seems like we haven't gotten very far in the book, but it is 7:30, and we might want to talk about immigration. Or we could put off immigration till next week and do more of the book now.
We should stop.
Okay. All right, now we are going to take a brief break, and you can send any questions you have. But when we come back, I am definitely going to talk about immigration in Arizona. And I have a lot of very interesting pieces of information to share with you about the American system. So be prepared for a little more after the break than usual, because I have some good stuff to share with you. But if you have questions about what we've done today, go ahead and send them. Also, if you have another political question that you would like to talk about next week, you can send that. If you don't send it, I might not say anything, because I'm not very political. All right, we're back, and we've had no questions. So let me talk to you about the question from last week about immigration. The student asked me to comment on the situation with respect to immigration in Arizona. excuse me, and I didn't really know there was a situation in Arizona. I'm not very, I don't listen to the news as much as some people, or very much at all. So, but I have a lot of friends who are in the know, so I asked some people what they thought. I asked 4 people. One was a married couple where the wife was the mayor of London, Ontario in Canada. And so she is very aware of everything that's going on. And her husband was an illegal immigrant. He escaped from Poland and came, and he lived in, I believe it was Sweden, as an illegal for 3 or 4 years, and then again in Canada as an illegal. So here we have an elected official and someone who has been an illegal alien, a refugee. So their viewpoint was very interesting to me. The husband had one idea and the wife had a different idea. The husband said that all he could think of when he thought of the Mexicans in Arizona and in California and in New Mexico, all the places where they're trying to get into the United States, all he could think of was how he felt working as a farm worker in Sweden, hiding from the police. And so his feeling was very personal toward the Mexicans trying to come in. But the mayor, his wife, her perspective was that we must have rule of law. And if there are laws that are not being enforced, we should change the laws so that they will be good laws. She clarified for me what was happening. Apparently, the federal government of the United States of America does not want to enforce the borders. For some reason, they want to allow a very loose border with people crossing over very freely. And so we're in a situation where we have laws that the government doesn't want to enforce. Now, apparently in California and New Mexico and maybe some other places, the borders became more strongly enforced somehow. And so all the illegal immigration was beginning to be pushed over into Arizona. And it was causing problems there. So Arizona petitioned the federal government to shore up the border, and the federal government refused. So Arizona started doing it themselves, at which point President Obama initiated a lawsuit against them for overstepping their jurisdiction, for doing what was not their right to do. They had to allow the federal government to do it. Of course, Arizona said that the federal government wasn't doing it, so they were going to do it. So my friend the mayor felt, as much as she had sympathy for the individuals involved, that really we need to enforce the laws we have or change them. Now, I also asked 2 of my friends who are very extreme on opposite sides. One of them is a woman who is a very close friend of mine. She became, in later years, an extreme radical on the left and in favor of homosexual rights and working for the poor and against the rich and against government. And she always was that way, but more so in recent years. And she wrote me an email about the situation. She lives in New Mexico. And she herself has been the victim of discrimination because she is a lesbian in a long-term partnership with children. So she's very sensitive to minority issues. And she has been a political activist in Nicaragua in favor of the Sandinistas. And also she's worked with Hispanic poor people for many years. So this is her perspective. Very smart woman. She starts out with some personal greetings, but then she gets into it. And I'll just read it to you. My take on the Arizona debacle is that it is horrible. Mexican and Mexican-American friends here in New Mexico are avoiding Arizona like the plague. In other words, nobody wants to go there, even Americans, and especially Mexicans. And a friend who recently drove through said that the cops, that is the policemen, the cops had lines and lines of folks pulled over. I'm going to write that up for you. It's kind of colloquial. They had the cops, that's policemen, I don't like this marker, had lines and lines of folks pulled over. So cops is policemen. Lines and lines. A line is a queue when people, one person behind the next, behind the next, behind the next. But this isn't people, this is cars, automobiles. Pulled over means the policeman stopped them and said, pull your car over and wait. So then there would be lines and lines. That means very long lines. Maybe it could stretch back miles of cars pulled over. And they were checking identification. Okay, that's what that means. Lines and lines of folks. Oh, by the way, when someone says folks, that means nice people. People like you and me. Folks means people, but it has a connotation of the kind of guy you would really like, just like you, or your brother. You know, folks is us. Lines and lines of folks pulled over. All right. They say that it's not racial profiling. But only immigrants that are the only immigrants that are targeted are Mexicans and Latinos, and of course anyone who looks like a Mexican or a Latino, which is up to the cop's discretion. By the word cop is negative. So this sentence shows animosity toward police and empathy toward the people. People are victims of the police. That's her perspective. It's not racial profiling. Racial profiling is kind of a hot word for America. That is, racial profiling is when an authority singles out a person because of their appearance to be a member of a race. Like only Mexicans. If you're Mexican, we will search you and we will ask questions, and we will require you to show documents. But if you're anyone else, you can go, you can go, you can go. Stop. You're Mexican. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? So you're not allowed to do racial profiling in America. They are supposed to either stop everyone or stop random people. And if they target one group, that is considered prejudice. Now, actually, in the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center, it was 11 men who were all young Muslim pilots. They all looked exactly alike. But afterwards, for years after, airports stopped everybody to check them to make sure they weren't a terrorist, because they weren't allowed to do racial profiling and only check people who looked suspicious. So anyway, she says, it's not racial profiling, supposedly, but only Mexicans or people who look like Mexicans are pulled over, and that is up to the cop's discretion. So if he doesn't like the looks of you, he can pull you over. Arizona has a long history of racism, anti-Semitism, and homophobia, and violence related to all of those. And to me, this is just the latest. So she says this checking out of the Mexicans and Latinos is another example of racism, anti-Semitism, and homophobia. Apparently, in Arizona, they've had a problem with minorities being treated badly, victimized with violence, Jews being mistreated, and homosexuals. If anyone uses the word homophobia, they are saying that you are bad if you do not accept homosexuality and even celebrate it. Okay? So these words are all part of her viewpoint. Okay, so she says what's happening is just like that. To make it worse, the Border Patrol and border law enforcement has set things up so that it is very difficult to cross in Texas, New Mexico, and California. So families are channeled into Arizona, where it is not only physically hellish, miles and miles of desert, but in addition to the unofficial authorities hunting people, there are hundreds of self-appointed Minutemen, KKK, and others who enjoy hunting brown-skinned people for sport. So, if you know the geography of the United States, Texas, New Mexico, and California share borders with Mexico. And the Border Patrol, for some reason, has more effectively closed the borders in those three states, which means, as she puts it, families are channeled into Arizona. So she's talking about the illegal immigrants going in as families. Families are channeled into Arizona, where the border is not controlled carefully, where it is not only physically hellish, miles and miles of desert. So in other words, these families, these very sympathetic illegal immigrants, on foot are now in the midst of miles and miles of desert. What will they do? They'll be thirsty and they might die. Not only that, in addition to the official authorities, border patrols, hunting people, hunting is what we do to animals, like go out with a gun and hunt for deer, hunting people. In addition to the authorities hunting people, there are hundreds of self-appointed Minutemen Minutemen, KKK, and others who enjoy hunting brown-skinned people for sport. This girl, what she is saying sounds very extreme. But she lives out there, so I don't know. But anyway, Minutemen is a term from American history. In the American Revolution, when we were colonies of Great Britain, and we wanted to rebel and become a country independently, the British sent soldiers who would march in formation. And the Americans didn't have an army. They only had farmers and people who had a gun who could be summoned in a minute. You knock on their door and say, "The British are coming," and they say, "Give me a minute." And they go and they get their gun and they load it and they're ready in a minute. So that's why they're called Minutemen. They were not real soldiers. They didn't wear a uniform. They were everyday citizens who had a gun, and they would go out and shoot British soldiers. So Minutemen suggests ordinary citizens who take it upon themselves to gather and enforce something or do a military action. KKK means Ku Klux Klan. Do you all know about this in Brazil, Alessandro? Okay. So, you know about this in Brazil. These are the people who hate black people and Jews and maybe some others. They're like terrorists. They terrorize with hate and violence. So, KKK, she's calling these people KKK, but they probably aren't. And then people who enjoy hunting brown-skinned people for sport. So she says, in addition to the desert heat, these poor families with women and children are subject to all of these people hunting them. Then she says, it makes me wish I were a Christian, so I could believe that these people will pay for their crimes and for the dead babies, pay for their crimes in hell, and the dead babies and children will go to heaven. So she sees the illegal aliens are babies and children and women and defenseless people. That's the light in which she sees it. Okay, she goes on to say, the context, of course, is that in 1994, NAFTA went into effect. North American Free Trade Agreement. North American Free Trade, which opened up trade between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. She doesn't like it. And for the first time in history, the Mexican agricultural market was opened up to outside exports and traditional Communal landholdings were broken up and offered to corporations. That's big business. Mexico's agriculture, until then the backbone of the economy, was devastated. Jobs and food are all gone. No jobs, no food in the countryside. Both moral law and international law affirm and insist upon the right and responsibility of parents to do what they have to do to feed their children. So she's saying the Mexicans have to cross over into America illegally to feed their children, or the children will starve. And morality, moral law, demands that the parents become illegal immigrants if that's what it takes to feed their children. And international law also demands that parents must feed their children, even if it means doing something illegal. The United States and the media are ignoring it. These criminals, meaning illegal aliens, are only parents trying to feed their children and children themselves. Those who gleefully prey upon them, well, I already said I wish I could believe in hell. Okay, that is my friend's personal opinion of the situation. Now I have one other friend who is a conservative, and this is his take on it. It's very interesting. Both of these are well-educated, intelligent, well-informed American citizens who are here and who see it. And you'll see this guy's opinion is the diametric opposite. And these are ordinary Americans. Listen to this one, and it's not as long. Arizona is suffering a huge crime wave committed entirely by illegals. A huge crime wave. Okay, so remember, my other friend explicitly said that it was children and babies and mothers and fathers of these children and babies who are just out in the desert trying to get to food because their children are starving. Well, he says it's a huge crime wave committed almost entirely by illegals, illegal aliens. Sections of federal park land have been restricted because they have been overrun by drug lords and are unsafe for the general public or even for law officers. That's a respectful way of saying policemen. Law officers, several of whom have been killed by illegal immigrants and drug lords. So, he's saying the local parks have to be shut down because they're unsafe for ordinary people or even policemen who have been killed by these criminals and drug lords who have overrun Arizona. Certain portions. Ranchers, people who own ranches, are being killed by illegal aliens trespassing on their property. Although not all illegals are Mexican nationwide in America, in Arizona, nearly 100% of the illegal aliens are Mexican. So this is a plug for racial profiling. Since the federal government refuses to enforce federal law, Arizona copied the federal laws to their own books. In other words, Arizona passed laws that were identical to the federal laws. They didn't even make up their own law. They just took the exact law off the federal books and made it also a state law so that they could enforce it under their jurisdiction. Arizona copied the federal laws to their own books and has begun enforcement at the state level. President Obama has filed suit against Arizona, which is outrageous since the new law is a copy of the federal law, which is still in force on the books. Your friend Dare said, my take on the Arizona debacle is that it is horrible. Mexican and Mexican-American friends here in New Mexico are avoiding Arizona like the plague, and a friend who recently drove through said the cops had lines and lines of folks pulled over. They say it's not racial profiling, but only the only immigrants that are targeted are Mexicans and Latinos. Then my other friend says, if the cops are actually doing what Dare implies, it is illegal according to the law in question, which calls for checking immigration status when someone is A, a suspect already stopped for some other violation, for example, a traffic stop, or B, there is reasonable suspicion that they are illegal. So it is not legal to racially profile. You have to either have already pulled the person over for a traffic violation, or you have to have reasonable cause of suspicion that they are an illegal. The Arizona law is a copy of the federal law. It was enacted by Arizona only because the federals refused to enforce it. The gist of the new law is only a paragraph long and easy to understand, and he gave me a link to the law itself, which I don't have with me, so that I could read the law in the original. It's available for public inspection. Now, I suppose the cops might be getting a bit tight on traffic laws just to get an opportunity to check someone's immigration status. And a legal Mexican might feel he has to drive very carefully. In other words, a policeman may see a Mexican driving by and say, let's look real carefully to see if there's some violation of traffic law that we can stop him for, so we can check and see if he's illegal. In that event, a legal Mexican would just have to drive very carefully to avoid breaking traffic laws. But there are no papers you have to carry other than your driver's license, which you have to carry anyway. Nearly all the illegal immigrants in Arizona are Mexican, so of course they're going to get stomped. In Boston, most of the illegals are Irish, but in Arizona they're all Mexican. Your liberal friend thinks it is fine for citizens to be murdered and private and federal property to be damaged, but deporting illegal aliens is horrible, she says. I wonder if she actually read the law. Eric Holder blasted the law while admitting he had never even read it. If the federals want more illegal immigrants, want to let more people in legally, all they have to do is increase the quota levels for visas. But they won't do it. Why? Because it would make the trade unions mad. Trade unions are groups of workers who command high wages for easy work. And the trade unions don't like immigrants because immigrants come in and take the work for less money. They're willing to work for cheap. So the government isn't going to raise quotas on immigration because that will make the trade unions mad. That'll make them angry. Democrats don't want legal immigration because illegal immigrants vote for the Democrats, but legal immigrants tend to vote conservative. So the Democratic Party wants to be the party of the poor, the party of the illegals. Even big business doesn't want to enforce immigration laws or increase quotas because illegals provide tax-free, cheap labor. Only concerned citizen groups have made any effort to stop the illegals, and nobody is calling for increased quotas. The purpose of the immigration law is to filter out the drug lords and criminals and let in hard-working people. By choking off legal immigration so that we can't have very many people come in legally, by choking off legal immigration and welcoming illegals, we get drug lords and criminals along with cheap laborers, as Arizona is finding out the hard way. The biggest losers are the hardworking Mexicans, as opposed to the drug lords. Denied a legal visa, they assume, rightly, that the government is corrupt, which is the case in Mexico for sure. And they pay bribes to coyotes, which are criminals, to expedite the process. Once here, in other words, somebody goes to Mexico and says, give me a bribe and I'll get you in. So they give him a bunch of money and he gets them in, but then they're illegal and they're like slaves. So once here, they are little better than slaves, and they will become a permanent slave class if this isn't rectified. Yes.
Students send a question.
Can we have another question?
And another student sent this piece by Michelle Malkin that he suggests that you read because it's connected to this.
Wow, it's long. Okay, so we have a question and a commentary on the situation. Let me see the question. Right. One question is about American law. When can a policeman stop a person and ask for his identification papers? Here in Brazil, the police can do this with any person on the street, but it needs a warrant to do it inside a private place. In America, you cannot do it without reasonable cause. In the immigration law, the person can be checked if they have been pulled over for an offense. So if they've already done something wrong, then they can also ask to check your identification papers. But they can't just stop you randomly. Or if they have reasonable cause to believe you are illegal, whatever that means. So they have to have cause to stop you, not just for walking by. Okay, now we have a little essay written by Michelle Malkin about how Mexico treats illegal aliens. So I'll read it to you. Mexican President Felipe Calderon has accused Arizona of opening the door to intolerance, hate, discrimination, and abuse in law enforcement. But Arizona has nothing on Mexico when it comes to cracking down on illegal aliens. While open border activists decry new enforcement measures signed into law in Nazi Zona last week, they remain deaf, dumb, or willfully blind to the unapologetically restrictionist policies of our neighbors to the south. The Arizona law bans sanctuary cities that refuse to enforce immigration laws, stiffens penalties against illegal alien day laborers and their employers, makes it a misdemeanor for immigrants to fail to complete and carry an alien registration document, and allows the police to arrest immigrants unable to show documents proving they are in the U.S. legally. If those rules constitute the racist, fascist, xenophobic, inhumane regime that the National Council of La Raza, Al Sharpton, Catholic bishops, and their grievance-mongering followers claim, then what about these regulations and restrictions imposed on foreigners? The Mexican government will bar foreigners if they upset the equilibrium of national demographics. How's that for racial and ethnic profiling? If outsiders do not enhance the country's economic or national interest, or are not found to be physically or mentally healthy, they're not welcome. Neither are those who show contempt against the national sovereignty or security. They must not be economic burdens on society and must have clean criminal histories. By the way, all that sounds kind of reasonable to me. But anyway, Those seeking to obtain Mexican citizenship must show a birth certificate, provide a bank statement proving economic independence, pass an exam, and prove they can provide their own health care. Illegal entry into the country is equivalent to a felony, punishable by 2 years imprisonment. Document fraud is subject to fine and imprisonment. So is alien marriage fraud. Evading deportation is a serious crime. Illegal reentry after deportation is punishable by 10 years imprisonment. Foreigners may be kicked out of the country without due process, and the endless bites at the litigation apple that illegal aliens are afforded in our country. See, for example, President Obama's illegal alien aunt, a fugitive from deportation for 8 years who was awaiting a second decision on her previously rejected asylum claim. Law enforcement officials at all levels, by national mandate, must cooperate to enforce immigration laws, including illegal alien arrests and deportations. The Mexican military is also required to assist in immigration enforcement operations. Native-born Mexicans are empowered to make citizens' arrests of illegal aliens and turn them into authorities. Ready to show your papers? Mexico's National Catalog of Foreigners tracks all outside tourists and foreign nationals. A national population registry tracks and verifies the identity of every member of the population, who must carry a citizen's identity card. Visitors who do not possess proper documents and identification are subject to arrest as illegal aliens. All of these provisions are enshrined in Mexico's Ley General de Población, General Law of the Population, and were spotlighted in a 2006 research paper published by the D.C.-based Center for Security Policy. There's been no public clamor for comprehensive immigration reform in Mexico, however, because pro-illegal alien speech by outsiders is prohibited. Consider, open borders protesters marched freely at the Capitol building in Arizona, comparing GOP Governor Jan Brewer to Hitler, waving Mexican flags, advocating that demonstrators smash the state, and holding signs that proclaim, quote, "No human is illegal. We have rights." But under the Mexican Constitution, such political speech by foreigners is banned. Non-citizens cannot in any way participate in the political affairs of the country. In fact, a plethora of Mexican statutes enacted by its Congress limit the participation of foreign nationals and companies in everything, from investment, education, mining, and civil aviation to electric energy and firearms. Foreigners have severely limited private property and employment rights, if any. As for abuse, the Mexican government is notorious for its abuse of Central American illegal aliens who attempt to violate Mexico's southern border. The Red Cross has protested rampant Mexican police corruption, intimidation, and bribery schemes targeting illegal aliens there for years. Mexico didn't respond by granting mass amnesty to illegal aliens, as it is demanding that we do. It clamped down on its borders even further. In late 2008, the Mexican government launched an aggressive deportation plan to curtail illegal Cuban immigration and human trafficking through Cancun. Meanwhile, Mexican consular offices in the United States have coordinated with left-wing social groups and the Catholic Church leadership to demand a moratorium on all deportations and a freeze on all employment raids across America. Mexico is doing the job Arizona is now doing, a job the U.S. government has failed miserably to do, putting its people first. Here's the proper rejoinder to all the hysterical demagogues in Mexico and their sympathizers here on American soil, now calling for boycotts and invoking Jim Crow laws, apartheid, and the Holocaust because Arizona has taken its sovereignty into its own hands. Hypocrites. Well, very interesting. So they say that Mexico is hypocritically demanding that Americans treat illegal alien Mexicans on our soil more leniently when they themselves do not do so with Central American aliens coming into their southern border. So, if you have any other issues of American politics that you would like to discuss, email it and we'll look into it. See you next week. And keep looking on the website. Eventually there will be some questions about whether you are interested in coming to America to